All right, everybody, welcome back. So, I'm just going to try to finish this out without the camera. You don't really need to see my not-so-smiling face. Let's get right into it. So, grams, as we mentioned, the breaking up, the tokenization of language into chunks produces grams. So one word or chunk of a word is called a gram. If we're going to put together multiple chunks, we can have bigrams and all the, trigrams and all the way up to n grams, however many n is. Okay, in spite of the fact that it really looks to me like it's big rams, and I almost wasted some time to use the emoji, I think that, it's one of the fun bits of terminology. Now, let's go ahead and look at a few of the things we can do with grams. Okay? So again, we don't have to actually understand language. We just have to look for the occurrence of words, of a gram or two or three in a row. Because if we can say that there was a particular word or a particular phrase in something, then we might be able to infer an interesting result out of that. Okay, so this is the Google Books Ngram Viewer. What does this do? Well, Google has been scanning books for more than a decade now, and they've scanned the vast majority of university libraries at this time. So most books that have been printed in the last several hundred years have been scanned. So if you would like to look at the way in which word usage has changed over time, this is the tool for you. It is easily and freely available. It is a piece of fun you can have anytime. So what if we would like to, for instance, understand something about how drug use has changed over time? Well, we can ask Google's Ngram Viewer, what have been the rates of occurrence of these 4 drugs, 2 of which are basically the same thing? How has it changed over time? So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that cocaine, in the orange here, has had a strong recent peak in the 80s and 90s and is on the fall, right? Now that's not cocaine usage, that's mentions of cocaine in published books. So there was kind of a heyday of publishing books that contain the word cocaine in the 80s. Now these are all books. They're not necessarily fiction, they're not necessarily non-fiction, it's a combo. All right, what about red opium here? We can see that it reached a strong peak in the early 19th century, and it has been on the decline ever since. What are these numbers, actually? That's kind of something interesting to note. So what they're saying is that something like 0.1% of all books in 1880 had the word opium in it. So that's pretty interesting. So the one other kind of trend that you can spot out of this is that as opium has been on the decrease, heroin has been on the rise, at least initially, until it too kind of, well, basically after Mick Jagger became basically the main consumer of all heroin, nobody else wanted it. So that's my opinion on that one. All right, well, let's take a look at some other things, because these guys were 1 grams. They were a gram. Haha. A gram of cocaine. Yes, that was the entire setup. I'm sorry, people. So the 1 gram of cocaine, we're just looking at single individual words. But we can look at an arbitrary number of words together in a row. Looking at thank versus thank you. So this one's kind of interesting. if you may or may not recall that World War I, as we call it, was not originally called World War I for some reason, possibly because they didn't realize there was going to be another one. So originally it was called the Great War. It was one of the very early kinds of common usages about it. And it was also called the World War here in blue, kind of relatively early. And then you notice that at a certain point, say about 1940 something, suddenly now it is called World War I. And we can see just a general drop off as we get towards modern era, that people are less and less interested in this early World War. We tend to prefer the second model. And in fact, I can show you how much we prefer the second model. Come on, super fast computer. Yes. World War II is quite a bit more popular in writing than World War I. So, very interesting bit of culture here, understanding how this has changed over time. So you can see lots of very fun things in here. You can see, for instance, that, the word ride has traditionally been much more common as a noun than it has been, has been much more common as a verb to ride than it has been as a noun, right? My ride. But maybe for reasons, perhaps hip-hop related, my ride is becoming quite a lot more popular recently. We can see here that the maybe baseball has had its day, and maybe even soccer too, right? For a long time, baseball was definitely more popular in writing books, but now with the increased market for tactical manuals, I guess, in soccer, or hagiographies, then we've found a fair amount of interest in the World Cup. But even it appears like it may be on the downswing. Sports is passé, especially in 2020. So this one's a very interesting bit of comparison of the modern and the ancient world. The magazine has had some very interesting peaks, notably the heyday of Life magazine, maybe, in here in the 40s and the 50s. This weekly photo magazine that everybody got instead of a newspaper, or maybe in addition to their newspaper. Also, ask your parents what a newspaper is, right? So, and then a little bit of a resurgence of the magazine in the era of Rolling Stone and so forth. But as we all know, print media has got some problems, and social media, well, thank you very much, Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, one more fun engram. So maybe relevant to you lot, data scientist is clearly a brand new phenomena, but analyst is still, at least in the writings of people making book things, has still by far the most common. I'd be willing to bet that if we did this on internet words, the result would be very different than on book words. And that just goes to show you the limitations of a particular data source. Okay. So there's a few more things that I just want to kind of run through with you. Different ways in which we can visualize stuff. But before we do, let me switch us back over to the slideshow eventually. There we go. So before we get into that, I want to just briefly tell you about everything else in natural language processing that exists. Now, I want to give you a sense of what we haven't talked about, right? As I said, all these clever little ideas to look at the n-grams, to look at the sentiment of words or sets of words, right? They get at some elements of the text, but they miss a lot else. So people have been trying to get in the lot else, the understanding the difference between abandoning your inhibitions and abandoning your hope, right? Then we've wanted to kind of work on that for a long time, and that's what natural language processing does. So let's look at what the process of natural language processing looks like. We've already talked about tokenizing, but there's a few more things, like figuring out what parts of speech, oh my God, language arts in 10th grade, right? What parts of speech a given word is. We need to understand, things like the stemming of stuff, detecting what entities are, what named entities are, linking them up to a unique identifier. These are all things I'm going to talk a little bit about right now. So this is a little list from of the broad categories of things in an NLP toolkit called Spacey. Is what this little slide is from. So it just gives you an idea, since the Spacey toolkit does all these things, that's kind of important to natural language processing. So let's take a little example here. So if we are looking through this sentence, we want to maybe summarize this text. Sorry, not sentence, paragraph, right? We want to summarize this text in a more condensed form. Is a fairly common natural language processing task. So to do that, we have to figure out, first off, that London is the main topic here. And we have to link London and its pronouns and plural form all the way through the entire paragraph. And then we have to extract from that elements of importance, right? Like capital is a thing, and that most populous city is a thing, and that it's particularly a location like England, and what is England anyway, right? So this is, you can see, like when you get into the nitty-gritty and try to imagine yourself as a dumb computer following dumb instructions, you can see how difficult a problem this is. Recognizing all these elements, linking them together when they don't have a clear shape. All right. So the first steps beyond tokenization on this is both finding out parts of speech and relationships, because many parts of speech exist as, things like transitive verbs, which start with one thing and end in another. So there's relationships among the parts of speech. So a library like Spacey is going to take a sentence that says Apple is looking at buying UK startup blah, blah, blah for $1 billion, right? I refuse to do the Austin Powers there. You can just imagine me doing it. Okay, so something needs to tag in that there's Apple is a proper noun, right? Something needs to tag in that the United Kingdom is a thing, right? So there's a publicly traded company called Apple and a geopolitical entity called the United Kingdom. And this is called named entity recognition, understanding that these are entities that have proper names, and then linking them even better to unique identifiers like the stock ticker AAPL, and understanding that Apple in this sense represents not a golden delicious, but a company that is publicly traded, okay, and linking it to a unique identifier. So this is, kind of, if we are getting into further and further steps of natural language processing that can help tremendously if you want to do various data science tasks. If you understand a little bit about the structure of the sentence, then you can do a lot more with understanding what the sentence is about, right? We want to summarize the text. Or if we want to understand something about what this web page even is, right? we don't even necessarily want to summarize the text. We want to understand what class of web pages this web page is as we're crawling. Okay, recognizing not just that Apple is a thing here, but recognizing which kind of Apple and linking it back to the stock may tell us that this is a news site which is dedicated to tech news. All right, so as I said, that was just a whole lot of NLP. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense to you, but I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to, look around for yourself when you're doing your project. Think about these things, investigate them, know what's out there, and it might influence you on the directions of your project. Okay, now for the last part of this, I'm going to just briefly run through a few fun interactive things that you should do on your own instead of watching me do it. Okay, the links are here and they will be posted in the show notes. So let's go back to the web browser. Right. So here's an interesting bit of natural language processing. So grabbing all these screenplays and looking at the ways in which they maybe don't really measure up in terms of representation of underrepresented minorities like women. Okay, so all these various 2000 screenplays, they were able to, using natural language processing, come up with a gender for each of the characters. And then they were looking at, okay, for every line of dialogue, let's just count it up and assign it to either male dialogue or female dialogue. And it turns out that relatively few films have very balanced gender lines. So men get the lion's share of the lines in these films. Okay? So for instance, a film like Finding Nemo is 75% what's his face and only 25% Dory saying anything. Okay? So you can see, let's see, trying to find a very familiar film. Oh, I Spit on Your Grave. Yeah, that's mostly male words because she's mostly silent. Bonnie and Clyde, also a fairly female-centric film, you would have thought. Still majority male words, right? So as we get more and more into the even gender split, okay, Woody Allen, Vicky Cristina Barcelona, probably one of my favorite Woody Allens. I'm not a big Woody Allen fan. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, very interesting. Don't remember that. You've Got Mail. Oh my. Yeah, so rom-coms are in here, huh? It would be interesting to know how these broke down. Chocolat, also a rom-com. It would be interesting to find out if some sorts of films were more gender neutral in their lines. Oh wait, we can. Comedy. Horror. Horror is a little bit more evenly distributed than... Interesting. Action. And all genres. Yeah, action is heavily male biased, unsurprisingly. Okay? Now, okay, what's missing from this kind of an analysis? Well, there's probably a very big difference between a female line that's just like, in a horror film, maybe it's just a shriek and a, oh my gosh, run, right? So big difference between that and, say, driving the plot. So we're not capturing that. We're just counting lines. So, but, we get something interesting out of it. By the way, I just wanted to note that over here in the 100% female words, a horror film that is worth your time. The Descent is probably still one of my favorites. So, All right. So you can explore this a little bit more on your own. It's got some nice, lovely D3 visualizations, all these little things that are dropping out of the sky on us and moving around as we scroll. That's D3. It's a JavaScript visualization structure. So definitely the kind of thing that people that do web data science love. So just put that on your radar. Here's another interactive one from our favorite pudding. 30 Years of American Anxieties, looking at the 20,000 letters that Dear Abby, the advice columnist in the newspaper, got. Again, go ask your parents what a newspaper is. So here they're breaking up topics and looking at all kinds of subunits in these topics. Okay? So they're able to recognize particular things going on as topics in a set of, in a set of words. So automatically extracting topics from a data set is just saying, hey, here are clusters of things that have similar kinds of words, and so they may form a topic. This is a big part of natural language processing. So a fairly common algorithm you will find in here is called LDA, for latent Dirichlet analysis, I guess. Yeah, must be analysis. And it's finding these topics. And it's just one of many, but a fairly common algorithm that's used to just cluster up. It's a clustering algorithm to cluster up documents by words to find topics based upon sets of common words shared among many documents. Okay, so this is worth your scroll. Another lovely one here, sentiment analysis of tweets, but for Trump. So, it has been hypothesized for a while that some of the tweets coming from the account Real Donald Trump are himself, and some of them are in fact staffers. So how could we find the difference? Well, one thing that people had said early on was that, you can easily look just in your Twitter feed and see that something was sent from iPhone or via Android. And they saw that there were the two different things, and they thought probably staff is on iPhone because people have taken photographs of the Donald doing his thing from an Android phone. Well, can we back that up with the words? So this is an analysis looking at the sentiment, like the level of anger, and also the timing of these tweets, and showing that Android tweets tend to be angrier and in the earlier part of the day, and iPhone tweets tend to be later in the day and less angry. So that's a fun one. But maybe the most elaborate is this one from the attempts to visualize the structure of narrative. Okay, so this is The Hobbit, and in fact I wanted to start not on this page but over here. So this website does a couple of books. The Hobbit, Kafka on the Shore, Haruki Murakami is another big favorite of mine, and The Glass Menagerie for those of you that are into the classics. But let's stay with The Hobbit because more people are probably going to be familiar with it than with Murakami. So what are we seeing here? These are those characters from The Hobbit. And in any given one of these, we can kind of click on Thorin Oakenshield and we can see who is he talking to during the course of this narrative here in Chapter 1. So this is only for Chapter 1. And if we switch it over to Chapter 10, we'll get a different set of people. So maybe actually Chapter 9, where the interactions are a little bit more sparse for Thorin. Okay, so on the one hand, we can see who's talking with whom in this, and we can see it in a dynamic process as the narrative progresses. And we can see that At certain points, most of the dwarves are not around, chapter 14, and then they come back. And everybody's in at chapter 18 where the action is peaking, right? So we can also see down here a positive negative sentiment thing. So the positive are represented by the red, negative by the black. Once again, sentiment is far from perfect. Yes. So here's Gollum when, Frodo is getting the ring off him. So, it doesn't know the way out, precious. Yeah, so that's marked as positive. I don't think Gollum says anything that's actually positive. So you can see that, the lexicon in context is definitely a problem here. I would not call this part of the story arc overly positive in the way in which it is marked. So that's a weird phenomena. Okay, but you can definitely see the slog through the Mirkwood right here, right? So, yeah, the Mirkwood is all just one big struggle, and you can see that entire part of the story arc quite clearly. So these are fun, interesting bits of, ways to look at culture using these kinds of tools. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I said, the links are there for you to play with, and then there's loads more besides. So, at any rate, that is all I had for you with text analysis. I will talk to you all again at the next lecture. Bye for now.